Imagine a country so small that you could literally run across it in just a few hours. On a world map, if you don't zoom in completely, it looks like nothing more than a misplaced speck of dust. But size is incredibly deceiving. Every single year, this miniature island is flooded by over 4 million tourists, more than 7 times its native population. How does a country this small survive that kind of pressure? And why is everyone flocking to this rock? Welcome to Malta, a place where nothing is quite what it seems. A land where history, 7,000 years, even predates the Egyptian pyramids. To truly understand Malta, you have to understand its geography. It is a tiny archipelago in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, covering only 316 square kilometers. That's roughly the size of a small U.S. town like Atlanta. It doesn't share a land border with any nation. All international travel happens by air or sea. If you sail 80 kilometers north, you hit Sicily, Italy. Sail south, and you reach Libya. Yet around 600,000 people live here permanently, making it one of the most densely populated nations on Earth. The country consists of 3 main islands: Malta, Gozo, and Comino. Gozo is much quieter and greener, while Comino is almost entirely uninhabited, except for a single hotel and the famous Blue Lagoon, where the water is so breathtakingly clear that boats look like they are literally hovering in midair. But here's the first major shocker: Malta has absolutely no permanent rivers or natural lakes. The landscape is dry, rocky, and built up. So how do 600,000 residents and millions of tourists survive? Every drop of drinking water comes either from collected rainwater or from massive desalination plants that turn salty seawater into fresh water. Because of this complex process, water here is an expensive commodity. Despite its environmental limitations, Malta is an incredibly wealthy country. Its per capita GDP stands at over $63,000, ranking 24th in the world, which is statistically higher than even Sweden. But this extreme wealth has created a modern nightmare: traffic. Malta has over 450,000 registered vehicles for a population of 600,000. That means roughly 3 cars for every 4 people. When you add thousands of rental cars driven by tourists, the narrow, ancient single-lane roads become completely jammed. Finding a parking space is a brutal daily struggle, to the point where owning a property with a private parking space is considered a genuine status symbol. Why not just build a subway or a tram system? Well, Malta is built largely on hard limestone bedrock. Tunneling underground is extremely difficult, heavily expensive, and poses a massive risk of collapsing the historical structures sitting right above. While residents get to ride the public buses for free, many locals still find the system insufficient, forcing them to buy cars and add to the gridlock. This lack of space has also driven the cost of living through the roof, especially when it comes to housing. Rent is a massive shock for newcomers. A basic one-bedroom apartment in central areas like Valletta or St. Julian's can easily cost 1,000 to 1,500 euros per month. Even in less touristy areas, it rarely drops below 700 euros. Because the average salary ranges from 700 euros for minimum wage to 1,800 euros for skilled workers, buying a home is an impossible dream for the average person. In fact, many young Maltese adults live with their parents well into their late 20s or even 30s, simply because they cannot afford to move out. Food, however, is a bit more reasonable. A decent meal at a local restaurant costs around 10 to 15 euros, though groceries can feel expensive since almost everything on the island has to be imported. This economic reality has created a unique psychological pressure. While tourists see a paradise, expats and long-term residents often complain about the lack of green spaces. There are no forests to escape to, no vast open fields. For some, living in such a confined, crowded space eventually starts to feel less like a tropical getaway and more like a golden open-air cage. The people who inhabit this rock are a fascinating cultural blend. If you look at the Maltese, you see the physical definition of the Mediterranean. They don't look like pale, light-eyed Northern Europeans. Instead, they reflect a beautiful mix of Greek, Italian, and Arab heritage, typically featuring olive skin and dark, straight hair. This cultural fusion is most obvious in their language. Maltese is a massive linguistic anomaly. It is the only Semitic language in the European Union. Grammatically, it sounds almost exactly like Arabic, but it is written entirely in the Latin alphabet. Fortunately for foreigners, because Malta was a British colony until 1964, English is also an official language. Almost everyone speaks it perfectly, making communication entirely seamless. Maltese people are overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, about 88.5% of the population. The church's influence is visible everywhere you look. There are over 360 churches on this tiny island, practically one for every single day of the year. The capital, Valletta, which measures a tiny 0.8 square kilometers, is entirely a UNESCO World Heritage Site, packed with historic churches, fortresses, and limestone buildings with iconic, colorful wooden balconies hanging over the streets. Despite the heavy Catholic roots, modern Malta is democratic and diverse. About 5% of the population is Muslim, alongside growing communities of Hindus, Buddhists, and atheists. The locals are genuinely warm and hospitable. Unlike other tourist traps around the world, Maltese people will not demand tips or money for doing you a small favor. Their kindness is genuine. Malta's entire history is defined by survival against impossible odds. In 1565, the Knights of St. John famously withstood a brutal, massive siege by the expanding Ottoman Empire. Against all calculations, the tiny island held its ground and won, which is why Valletta remains heavily fortified to this day. Centuries later, during World War II, Malta became the single most bombed place on Earth. The Axis powers dropped thousands of tons of explosives to break British supply lines. The Maltese people endured unimaginable hardships, but refused to break. In recognition of this monumental bravery, King George VI awarded the George Cross, a prestigious military medal for civilian courage, to the entire island. Today, that very cross sits proudly on Malta's national flag. Because these historic limestone streets look so dramatic and timeless, Malta has basically become a real-world Hollywood movie set. Blockbusters like Gladiator, Troy, and the first season of Game of Thrones were all filmed here. You can even visit Popeye Village, an entire fictional wooden village built as a set for the 1980 musical film Popeye, which has been preserved as a permanent tourist attraction. As the sun sets, Malta transforms. The island is world famous for its chaotic nightlife, centered entirely in a district called Paceville. Filled with clubs, bars, and lounges, it stays packed until the early hours of the morning. The crowd is a high-energy mix of tourists and tens of thousands of international students who move to Malta every year to attend its massive English language schools. The legal drinking age here is just 17, which draws an incredibly young, energetic crowd. However, this party scene has a clear dark side. Heavy alcohol consumption leads to frequent rowdy behavior, street fights, and highly active pickpocketing networks targeting phones and wallets. Some of the cheaper clubs sell low-quality, questionable alcohol that can pose health risks, and solo female travelers often report receiving unwanted, aggressive attention in these zones. Yet outside of the Paceville party bubble, Malta is incredibly safe. In fact, it ranks as one of the safest destinations in Europe. Violent crime is rare, the streets are well lit, and you can walk freely late at night without looking over your shoulder. Even during winter nights, temperatures rarely drop below 10 degrees Celsius, keeping the outdoor cafe culture alive year-round. To wrap up, Malta has some of the strangest quirks and laws you will ever encounter. The divorce ban. Believe it or not, divorce was completely illegal in Malta until 2011. It was one of the last countries on Earth to finally legalize it. The Devil's Clocks. Look closely at the twin clocks on old Maltese churches, and you'll notice they show different times. This is an ancient tradition designed to confuse the devil so he won't know the actual time of the Holy Mass. The Poop Detectives. Dog owners must register their pet's DNA with the government. If you leave your dog's waste on the street, authorities can scientifically test it, match the DNA to your pet, and mail you a massive fine. The National Dinner. While most people view rabbits as cute pets, in Malta, rabbit stew, known as stafat talfinek, is the proud national dish. Fireworks obsession. The local village festivals, or festas, feature a massive fireworks culture. Neighborhoods actively compete against each other to see who can launch the loudest and most extravagant displays, filling the summer skies with constant explosions. So, is Malta a paradise? It depends on what you are looking for. If you crave deep forests, quiet isolation, and open horizons, you might feel trapped on this rocky island. But if you love year-round sunshine, deep ancient history, vibrant social scenes, and a safe environment, Malta might just be your perfect destination. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, share it with your friends, subscribe for more global journeys, and let us know in the comments. Would you live in Malta? Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.